place to be. I think that I have to say that a lot of the teachers I've spoken to are concerned that some of the students are just using artificial intelligence to write their essays and to respond to some of the questions. And they're really concerned. They're concerned that it's going to have an effect of making the students automatons, or in words that I should, dummies, and we don't want that. So this is the reason why we had people go out to the schools to share with you what that machine is and the cognition metrics that are associated with it, and hope that you will begin to think in terms of it being a tool and not something that's going to replace your brain. So to our distinguished authors, thinkers, and cultural workers who have traveled from across the region and beyond, thank you for bringing your brilliance to our shores. Your work expands the possibilities for our students, affirms the experience of our elders, and reminds us that the Caribbean stories belong in every global conversation. We have authors who've come from across the region, and I was saying last night that we have one author. Actually, she's somebody who responded to a call for papers for the Caribbean writer, and she was so excited about joining us. She's coming out of Trinidad, and her journey was a little circuitous. She left Trinidad, and she went to Grenada, and then Barbados, Antigua, the BVI. She took a boat over to St. Thomas, and she was supposed to come in last night on the Cape Air. I'm not sure if she's arrived yet, but she should be here today. That's Michelina Charles. And I want to thank our sponsors. When we talked about artificial intelligence, the RT Park is an important, in that conversation, the RT Park helped me. As a matter of fact, I called Camille Paul, Sydney Paul. There's a Camille there in that family. I called Sydney Paul, and she connected me with Louise Stapleton and Dr. Warburg to have this conversation. So I want to thank the RT Park. We didn't mention them last night, but they've been our partners from the very beginning. And welcome Ms. Salim from the RT Park and the other members of the park that are here. We have a number of sponsors, and we're going to mention the sponsors a little later on, but I don't want to take too much more time. I just wanted to make sure that, I think some of what I'm doing is a little nervous energy. I just want to make sure that things go right. Our authors are happy, and our students are happy, and it seems like things are going very well. So welcome and have a wonderful day. The other speakers are not here, so we're going to get started with the panel discussion. I think people are ready for that. And Ms. Blanchett is our timekeeper. You look at her and she'll give you a sense of how much more time you have. She has cards that says 5 minutes, 10 minutes time. And Ms. Blanchett is sitting right here. Ms. Blanchett, could you raise your hand, please? Our first panel is a panel that is going to be introduced by Dr. Brianna McDaniel. Dr. Brianna.
Good morning. Sorry, I am an English professor, and when my students say good morning, I say once more, good morning. And then I say, that's better. Thank you. So this morning, I will be introducing our illustrious panelists for our keynote panel on literature and identity, crossing borders. So as I introduce the panelists, they are welcome to come up. And I'll start first with Annie Paul, who is going to be facilitating today our conversation. So, Annie Paul is an India-born, Kingston-based writer and critic who is editor of the University of the West Indies Journal on Social and Economic Studies till 2021 when she retired from the university. She was the 2023 Lakes Writer in Residence at Smith College in the USA, where she taught a course called Writing. In 2020, she published a biography of Stuart Hall in the UWI Press's Caribbean Biography series. Editor-in-chief of the new online magazine of writing, Pre, and a founding editor of Small Acts, she has been published in international journals and magazines such as Newsweek International, The Guardian, Chimaranga, The Caravan, Slavery and Abolition, The Art Journal, South Atlantic Quarterly, Wasafiri, Callaloo, and Bomb. Also, she has a range of art books and catalogs, such as the Brooklyn Museum's Infinite Island and documentals Creolite and Creolization. Most recently, Annie Paul has published an edited selection from the first 5 issues of Pre, and those are entitled Bookmark. She was on the board of the National Gallery of Jamaica and has published extensively on art. She is also the author of the blog Active Voice at anniepaul.net. Welcome, Annie Paul. Next, we have Desmond Hall. Desmond Hall was born in Jamaica, West Indies, and moved to Jamaica, Queens. He has worked as a high school biology and English teacher in East New York and Brooklyn. He's counseled teenage ex-cons after their release from Rikers Island and served as Spike Lee's creative director at Spike DDB. Desmond has served on the board of the Partnership for Drug-Free Kids and the Advertising Council. He's also judged the One Show, the American Advertising Awards, and the New York City Downtown Short Film Festival. He's also been named once one of Variety magazine's top 50 creatives to watch. Desmond is the author of the gritty YA novel, Your Corner Dark, which confronts the harsh realities of gang life in Jamaica and how far a teen is willing to go for family. Welcome, Desmond. Donna Hemans is the author of River Woman, Tea by the Sea, and Tree of 1,000 Feet, which is forthcoming from Zibby Books. In 2015, she won the Lignum Vitae Una Marston Award for Adult Literature for her unpublished manuscript of Tea by the Sea, and was named the co-winner of the 2003 and 2004 Townsend University Prize for Literature for River Woman. Donna's short fiction and essays have appeared in Slice, Electric Literature, Miss Magazine, The Rumpus, Crab Orchard Review, among many others. Donna received her undergraduate degree in English and Media Studies from Fordham University and has an MFA from the American University. She lives in Maryland and is also the owner of DC Writers Room, a co-working studio for writers based in Washington, D.C. Welcome, Donna. Etaf Rum is a Palestinian-American New York Times best-selling author. Her debut novel, A Woman is Man, garnered attention as a Today Show read with Jenna Pick. Marking the beginning of her literary acclaim. With her latest novel, Evil Eye, recognized as an NPR Best Book of the Year, Etaf Rum solidifies her position as a leading voice in literary fiction that transcends continents and histories. I also want to add that she has a bookmobile, a book truck, that she operates in North Carolina, which is a huge feat. As a small business owner and a bookstore owner myself, I applaud you and I welcome you, Etaf. Are y'all tired of me yet? Yeah. Okay. we have one more fantastic author to welcome. Nanda Reddy is a Guyanese-American writer. She's also a former fourth grade teacher and part of an enormous extended family who mostly live in Florida. Her father is one of 17 siblings, and her mom is one of 9. She has over 50 first cousins, and they all know her as Bobby. In her teaching days, she co-wrote 180 Days to Successful Writers, a day-to-day writing curriculum best suited for elementary classrooms. She loves visiting off-the-grid places with her husband and 2 teenage boys, and to clear her mind, she runs or plays with watercolors. But her most favorite thing to do is to read. A Girl Within a Girl Within a Girl is her debut novel. Welcome, Nanda. And I'll turn it over to you, Annie.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks for being here on a Friday morning to listen to us talk about writing. I think what I'll do is just sort of briefly frame the conversation, but we don't have to stick to my framing. I look forward to hearing what each of you has to say. Because essentially what we're talking about is what is known as the politics of location, right? I mean, it's a tremendously fraught sort of area with questions of authenticity and so on, you know, being brought up by, in connection with offshore writers versus on-island in-country writers, etc. When Marlon James, the Jamaican writer, won the Booker Prize in 2015, one of our main newspapers, the Jamaica Observer, wrote an editorial which said, "Is exile really a necessity for Caribbean writers?" And in which they claimed that because writing novels is really a work of the imagination, that this could be done anywhere, you know? Which means that they were suggesting that Marlon didn't have to leave Jamaica in order to write the wonderful books he has written, right? And so somehow the myopia of that statement was pretty stunning. But it also reminded me that in the year 2000, another Jamaican writer called Colin Chana had disputed the notion of exile. He said, you know, we're not in exile. Caribbean writers who live abroad are not in exile. They're not fleeing persecution necessarily. We're just like any other, you know, teachers, nurses, other workers who are forced to leave the Caribbean and live abroad to make a living or to better ourselves. So, but he also then made a very provocative statement, which I'd like to read out. Let me find it. This is what he said. He said, I understand why you would feel that our work would be enhanced if we were able to write while looking out the window on the landscape whose mud was used to make us. But elders, I must remind you of something. I was there in Jamaica in the 70s. Where were all our novelists then? The big men with the big names and the big positions when the gunmen burned down the Eventide home and bun up the old lady them? Where were they when the army murdered some ghetto youth at the Green Bay firing range after enticing them with offers of guns? Where were they when they shoot Bob Marley? End of quote. Uncannily, this was a whole 15 years before Marlon James's brief history, in which, you know, the story of Marley is a central plot theme. So you know, in 2000 when Chana said that, Marlon was nowhere on the horizon yet. But it's true that our local writers based in Jamaica had not thought that any, or certainly had not dwelt on any of these themes that were mentioned by Chana. So it took somebody living in the diaspora, Marlon James, to work Jamaica's tortuous history and wring from it a story that so vividly captured the terror and permanent state of emergency many Jamaicans inhabit. You know, and so I'll just end there because I'd like to dispute the idea that you have to be based in the particular location that you're writing about. But let's hear from each of you. Would you like to start, Nanda?
Well, I'd like to think you don't need to live in the place you were born to write about it, because that's what I did. I think it's a question of identity. This is what I'm sort of understanding from the question that you asked or the statements you made. Marlon James, Jamaican, and he wrote a Jamaican story, but he didn't write it in Jamaica. Is he allowed to do that? I think it's also a question of what are you allowed to do. I was 9 when I left Guyana. I didn't leave by choice. You know, my family left, we emigrated, and I grew up in the States. And so a lot of us who have that dual experience where we were brought up somewhere, because 9, pretty old, I feel like I had a childhood in Guyana, but then my formative years were in Miami. You have an identity crisis at some point, but it's not something you think about intentionally. It's just it's a factor of growing up in 2 very distinct places and trying to fit in. And I think a lot of us end up feeling slightly homeless because you're I'm Guyanese. I go back to Guyana, I feel at home, but I'm no longer Guyanese because my accent was erased by just being young enough that in school, even though I have a huge Guyanese family and I'm around Guyanese people all the time. But I'm also, American, but I'm not completely American because I have that culture. So there's a sort of homelessness that I think we all explore in our works too. And that question of what am I allowed to write kind of did come up. When I was writing this story, my debut novel, and it's set in Guyana, am I allowed to write a character set in Guyana? I am Guyanese, but am I allowed to do that? I think that question I played around with just super briefly because I was like, yes, of course I'm allowed to write that. Because at the time we were talking about appropriation a lot in literature, and the character I wrote arrives without papers. I didn't live that experience, even though I knew people that lived that experience, and so there was the, am I appropriating? You can get really nitpicky when you talk about that. But at the end of the day, it was a question of what am I allowed to do, and I think if we're not allowed to tell stories based on a complicated journey in history, then what are we allowed? Like, what are we allowed to write? What are writers allowed to write? I would say Marlon James, of course, is totally allowed to write those stories. He is from there, and he did a great job. And so, and I would say that certainly that as long as you play around with the nuance of identity and you acknowledge that yeah, you're allowed to write it.
Okay. So
all I can think of when you were speaking of exile and whether that term is actually sufficient is we're all in a way exiled as humans from our own wholeness and divinity, regardless of our culture and regardless of our backgrounds. And in terms of whether we're allowed to tell stories about places that we haven't been born and raised in. So my parents are Palestinian. They were born and raised in refugee camps in Palestine. And my father immigrated to America at 19 to Brooklyn, worked in bodegas, trying to give his life, his family, and his future children a better life. He came back to Palestine, married my mother, found a wife, married my mother, brought her back to Brooklyn, and there they had 9 kids. So I'm the oldest of 9. And I grew up in Brooklyn. And although I visited Palestine a lot of summers growing up, I never really felt like you, very hyphenated. I didn't belong in Palestine. I didn't fully belong in Brooklyn, even though I was born and raised there, because I lived in Bayrage, so it's a melting pot of all cultures. I was surrounded mostly by Arabs, went to an all-girls Muslim school where I had to cover up. And so years later, after college, after grad school, after I had gotten an arranged marriage at 19 and moved to North Carolina, it was only in exile, or even away from Brooklyn and away from Palestine and away from my family, that I was able to liberate myself from the conditions of those places. And it gave me enough perspective to be able to look back. I don't think they could have been written in those places because I was still enmeshed with the conditions and the limitations of that space. And so I actually needed to leave, and I'm assuming these writers, it's not that they're not in the conflicts of identity and voicelessness, and they're not seeing the violence around them in their home places. It's not that they don't see them, but it takes, writing is a way to find yourself. And when you're in those places, at least for me personally, it was dangerous to speak. It was dangerous to go against the norms of my family. It took me years to even have the bravery to look inside myself and ask myself, well, who am I once I strip away the identities that were handed to me? Who am I? You can't do that sometimes in the place. You need to widen your perspective. And that goes for all writers of all colors. I mean, the whole point of writing is to create bridges across communities, across cultures, and then get to the point which is we are all exiled from our own wholeness. And we're all told that we're this person, this culture, this color, this race. But underneath that, we're all one. We're all one consciousness. We're all one. And we've been robbed of that by the division that all of this has created. And so I think we can write whatever we want, and as long as the purpose of it is to bring unity.
Yeah, I agree. Without the exile part, I agree wholeheartedly with that, because I think when you move away from a place, it changes your perspective completely. And I think it's easier to write about a place when you're no longer living there, because you see different things. I can write about Jamaica from 2 perspectives. From somebody who grew up in Jamaica, who lived in Jamaica. I can also write about Jamaica from the perspective of somebody who's lived outside of Jamaica. And so the things that I see and the things that my characters who move back to Jamaica see and experience would be very different from somebody who's never left the island at all. And I think that for writers, for us as a community, for the Caribbean in general, we are all in some ways nomadic people. We have lived in the Caribbean, we've moved around the Caribbean, we've moved to Europe, we've moved to the United States and Canada, and all of those perspectives are just very, very different, but they're all part of our entire story. So I think that the question that the Caribbean or the people who are looking at what writers do or who are making determinations about what we're allowed to write or not allowed to write need to ask the question, which is why are all our writers leaving their homes and living somewhere else? And I think if we look at that and answer that question, then we can create the kinds of spaces that allow more people to either come back home or remain at home and actually write the kinds of stories that they want to write and be successful, not just in having books in print, but actually make some money and be able to sell the books in bookstores and have our bookstores actually carry our books and or even have them printed in the Caribbean. So I think there's so much more. We need to have that infrastructure, and if we don't have it, then people are going to leave and are going to find ways to do that kind of creative work outside of their homes.
So for me, the writer of Charlotte's Web was not a spider. The writer of The Jungle Book was not a bear nor a snake. Diana Macaulay is on island, and she is a fantastic Jamaican. That me Ataku. She is brilliant, if you haven't read her. I reject completely what this concept of you having to be embedded in an environment in order to write about it. I'm not saying it doesn't help because we write what we know. That's almost like foundational for a writer. However, I think when you do your job as a writer, you capture a certain humanity in people, in the culture, in the environment, in the oxygen, in the elements within the oxygen. You go ahead and you find all of that. And that is your job as a writer. So, again, the writer of Charlotte's Web was not a spider.
That's a great observation. Thank you. Thanks. That was a good way to start off. And I think that what strikes me immediately is that homelessness, as when it's discussed by somebody who's from Palestine or whose origins are Palestinian, has a very unique when we talk about homelessness, it's very different. We can't compare. It's so piercing to hear about Palestinian identity at this time, in particular, with what's going on. So I mean, I can hardly articulate what I want to say. But there was a discussion on Facebook a couple of days ago, started by an African writer, and this is someone based in whatever country this was in Africa, complaining about the fact that diasporan African writers have written, what African novels are, so to speak, and the person was resentful about that because they said that, this is all about, these diasporan writers are constantly writing about identity and being in the diaspora, and these are stories of migration. And why has that been centered so much? There's a kind of resentment about the fact that also, and this is something I also hear in Jamaica a lot by Jamaican-based writers that write, Caribbean writers who move abroad have so many more opportunities available to them, to develop their writing, to publish their writing, to take it further, much further. Because as I started my, the comments I made that I started with, I described how the Jamaica Observer was so sort of blind to the, what is it that writers need, and what is writing about? I mean, they thought, oh, it's just a work of imagination. But that is the barrier we're dealing with in many of our countries. The people in charge, the people who are at the top, they have this kind of very blunted outlook, you know? So this is why writers are forced to leave, and not just writers, but artists or any kind of creative people who really want to take their craft to another level. Now, once you say that, it immediately sets up a false, thing between the writers who stayed and the ones who left. Edward Baugh, and I'm sorry to be constantly quoting only Jamaican writers, but those are the ones I've read the most. But Eddie Baugh has a wonderful poem called Choices, in which he's welcoming a friend who moved abroad and has come home for holiday or whatever, and Baugh is receiving them. He says, "Oh, I've made such and such soup for you, please come, you're welcome." But in the end, by the end of the story, he ends up, it's a kind of subtle, veiled insult. He says, "You're most welcome and I'll always be happy to receive you, but please don't imply that because I didn't leave, I lack ambition, as a writer." So I'm just throwing out a few thoughts, and let's see whether you guys have anything else to say.
I'm not sure what to say about that one. But I think, I left Jamaica when I was 16. And pretty much my parents put me on a plane. I didn't have much of a choice. I certainly have the choice to go back, and I've thought about it a lot. And eventually I know I will. But I think going back also makes me think of a lot of, there are a lot of questions that I'd have to answer. Where exactly am I going to live? What is the infrastructure that I'm going to have as a writer? How am I going to build that community that I need? And I know, Annie, you will certainly tell me that there is a community, but that's in Kingston. I do not want to live in Kingston. So I think, it's a lot of questions like that I think we as writers, as creative people, like anybody who's looking at and thinking about home and going back home, I have to ask just those very basic, simple questions. What is my life going to be? What is my creative life going to be like? And would I be able to continue doing what I'm doing in some kind of isolation if I'm not embedded in a community with a lot of other writers around? So I think there is just, there is so much, but I also think that we need to stop thinking about the limitations of place and looking at our stories as looking at the difference or trying to find differences between writers who are living at home and those who are living abroad. We're all telling our story. It's the same story, just in different places. And even if we're living at home, our experiences are also still so very different, because the stories that would be coming out of a person like me who grew up in Brownstown, in St. Anne, in the country, is going to be just very, very different from the stories of Marilyn James coming out of Kingston. And I think all of those stories, all of those perspectives matter, and we should be telling all of those stories in the same way that the stories that are coming out of Jamaica, embedded in Jamaica, a writer embedded in Jamaica would be different from that of a writer who's living outside of Jamaica. And the simple truth is that the majority of Jamaicans are outside of Jamaica. So most of the stories are probably going to come from people who are living away from the island. So I really hope that at some point we'll get beyond that kind of conversation and really try to figure out how we can all be, be one, be writers across the Caribbean, not just specific islands, but looking at festivals like this that really embrace all of us, all of our stories, all of our voices, and really make a bigger push to get our stories much more widely viewed and seen and published.
There's so many interesting points, so I'm having trouble narrowing down. Well, when you were speaking, it was reminding me of when I sat down to write A Woman Is No Man, my first novel. And the reason why I bring this up is because at the time I had just left. I left Brooklyn. I I visited Palestine most summers as a kid, but I was never truly Palestinian. And when I arrived in North Carolina after college, after degrees, I was already a mom by then. Like I said, I got married young. Around 26 years old, I had achieved everything that I thought would be successful. I had surpassed what my parents had done. Like I said, they came from refugee camps. I was educated. I was a young mother. I had a job. I was a professor at a community college. I had students. I felt, wow, I really surpassed where I came from. And I still felt trapped inherently by my identity, unknowingly. And it took me writing my first novel to really understand that I hadn't confronted myself. Like, and all of us writers, right, we write to confront ourselves. And the number one question I kept thinking was the question of representation. I'm in America. I'm in a white town. I live in a small white town in North Carolina. I think back to Palestine and Brooklyn, the communities that I came from. And although writing should have felt like liberation, it felt like a betrayal. All I kept thinking was, this story that I want to tell requires me to be truthful about the place that I came from, truthful about the ways that I was limited, the ways that oppression and patriarchy are still so strong in our community and unescapable. And I could not have penned that story or found the courage to even confront myself had I still been there, had I still been in Brooklyn, had I still been in Palestine. And I think that's where my mind goes when we have these discussions. It's not only, oh, are you allowed to write about a place if you leave the place, but also when you leave the place, you have to also think about the forces that might be using your story for certain agendas. Like in my novel, Woman is No Man, it's about a lot of domestic abuse. It's about oppression, female silencing, and I felt like I was betraying my community when I was writing about those things. It did not feel like I was getting closer to myself. I had to dismantle everything that I thought I knew about myself and where I was from in order to come to it with truth, but the truth is hard. And then you think about, these white publishing houses or these white magazines or these white news outlets that, oh yay, here's a Arab woman talking about Arabs being beat. Great, like let's push that. But it's very difficult to honor a community while also being very truthful about the things that need to change. And when we talk about leaving places to write and find ourselves, it's because sometimes that's necessary. And hopefully the work that we do can help those that are still there develop the perspective to see themselves differently in the ways that we weren't able to see ourselves in those tight-knit communities. So.
I totally agree with both Donna and Etaf. And to echo what Etaf was saying, I think to confront identity, you do have to leave. You have to give yourself that space. She was saying she didn't have the space to think about who she was and what her community is about while she was in it. And so maybe that's also going back to your first question. But I think it's also a question, because I think what you're asking about is why are diasporic writers more successful than the ones that live in their countries? I think that's a question partially also of the audience who's buying books and promoting books. And Etaf touched on that when she said, these white publishing houses, they like eat up these stories of trauma. And I wrote a story of trauma. Did I live trauma? That was another reason I was like, am I allowed to write this? I did not live trauma that I wrote. So I wrote a story of trauma that very fast-paced, and of course the publishing house bought it. And while it's done well, there are a couple of people who are like, well, did it have to be that dark? And partly, I think, I mean, there is this audience that like wants that, and some Guyanese people have asked, they're like, why couldn't you have told a nice story about Guyana? And I mean, partly story has to have conflict, right? So, I mean, I don't know, but it also has to have truth, and being away from Guyana and having the space to confront identity, I was able to explore, racism in the culture that I might not have been allowed to were I living in it. Because the people would be around me questioning me, like, why are you saying that? Why are you pointing it out? What's better? I was able to confront, this patriarchy as well that's alive and well. And so I think it's a question of space to explore identity and also the audience. Because, I mean, authors have to make money. And when you're living in your country, often, to choose to be an author, number one, is to say, I'm choosing not to make a ton of money. Because most of us don't make a ton of money. And but to have that privilege while you're living in your country, when there's, Donna was saying, not really the most robust publishing machine, that's part of the problem. And then I think the other thing is when a novel does well, a diasporic novel does well, and brings that representation to people have discovered Guyana through my book. Most of the people who read my book in America, I go to book clubs, they're like, I had to look it up. I had no idea where this country was. I had no idea. And I think it opens doors for the people in Guyana to have their books do well too, because then it becomes something that, okay, well, we kind of know about this place now. So I think it's a two-way, like it helps. It's not like it's a hindrance just because it's not a zero-sum game here with the love for the books. So, okay.
Yeah, so my second novel won the Massachusetts Book Award, and it also won the Young Adult Caribbean Caricon Award. So where Massachusetts, if anyone failed geography, isn't in the Caribbean. And, it's two separate places that recognize the work, right? And the idea of, I really reject what that writer wrote. It's kind of like making me really angry, actually. Because when you think about it, again, when you do the job as a writer, you either go from your memory, your experience, or there's invention, or there's a thing called research. And when writers do that, they are able to capture a great deal of genres, events, lifestyles, and such. And so I think, the idea of, being out of the country and being on island is a question of resources, right? You don't get into writing to make money, because the majority of writers do not make a lot of money. The people like Dan Brown and such, they make a ton of cash on their work. But for the great majority, writers do not get large financial deals. And they have to sacrifice a great deal in order to write. And they write from the soul. And writing is very hard. You think about, a great writer that had an amazing quote. I hate writing, but I love having written. Right? And that is it. It's a process. Like Ita was saying, it's painful, And I love also what Donna was saying about I can't stand when unity is attacked, because unity is such a hard thing to come by as it is. And that's why things like, this festival are so important. So going back to, because you set up so many things for us to really talk about, the idea that you have to be on island, well, if you have the resources to write on island, right? And, Jamaica is not one place. Kingston, generally, people have more money. Where I come from, Anchovy, we didn't have a lot of money. Westmoreland, different money. Right now, part of my family, because of the hurricane, is cooking outside with wood and fire because the part of the infrastructure was completely destroyed, and they are doing what they can. So again, I reject the idea of on island and off island, and I think a lot of the profusion of Caribbean work that has come out, I think it's a lot of the publishing industry has made a concerted effort to get diverse books, to have people actually see themselves in the work. And I applaud that opportunity. I hope it doesn't close up because, again, it wasn't that open earlier, in the last century. So,
Thank you. So I think this is going to be the last winding up sort of round. I was really pleased by what you said earlier about Charlotte's Web, the author not being a spider, or Rudyard Kipling not being a bear. But I do find that a lot of us, I edit a magazine of writing from the Caribbean, and almost I would say 99% of the stories that are submitted to us and poems are all Caribbean related. So it seems as if, well, there is this adage, write what you know, right? Which is the opposite of what you were saying. Obviously, Charlotte's Web, who's the author? I can't remember the name, would not have been able to express herself as a spider, but if she didn't just jump into her imagination. And it reminds me that Anthony Winkler, another Jamaican novelist, a white Jamaican novelist, said that when he was in school, he won an essay competition in which he wrote, I don't remember what the subject was, but he wrote very convincingly about an encounter with a polar bear in a snowstorm and so on. And it was so impressively written that he won the competition, yet he had never left the Caribbean, had never experienced snow, and had certainly never encountered a polar bear. So, but I wish that there was more of that kind of, that we would not feel obliged constantly to only write about where we are from, embracing our identity all the time, and launch into our imaginations a little more. But yes, do you all feel obliged to write about the Caribbean, or in your case about? Yes.
yeah, so I feel no obligation to, write about Jamaica, but my first book was dedicated to my uncles who were assassinated. They got into the business, let's just call it that, and it was an incredible heartbreak for our family, including for me personally, a big rift between my mother and I, as these were her two little brothers. And the second book, was my sister. It was a story about a barrel girl. And if you don't know what a barrel girl is, a barrel children is a phrase coined by a Caribbean psychiatrist. And it's the concept of children being left by their parents to go to the so-called first world, where they could earn more money, within 3 years than they can in a decade on island. But when they leave these kids, you get into an issue of abandonment, right? And there's a special twist to the abandonment. And that is, even though barrels are sent, and for anyone that doesn't know what a barrel is, it's a container about yay high, this wide, and it's filled with everything from jeans, cell phone covers, rice, cooking oil, all the things that sometimes you can't get on islands, sometimes they're just too pricey. And you get these barrels and they're kind of like Christmas. And it's wonderful but those children would trade 10, 20, 50 barrels to have their parents, right? And what happens is they are shamed by others in the community when they get the barrel because they have the stuff, right? And that's like a really terrible thing, and it creates an incredible issue with the bond between the children and the parents. And, you know, I find finding issues like that and putting that into the work is the work of a writer. You find something, a theme, a purpose, a project, and you go about putting that into your work. And whether it comes from, you know, being in your past on the island, in your present on the island, if it comes as being a spider on the island, I don't think it matters as long as you do the job well.
I have not felt any compulsion to write about anybody other than the people I know, the place I know, and I will continue to do so. It might be an animal, I don't know, but I'm sure that animal would be in Jamaica. But I think a large part of it for me is that for a very, very, very long time, our stories were told by somebody else. And I think it is my duty to tell my story and to make sure that it is heard. And, you know, for some people it makes sense to tell different stories, but I think for me it is about who I am. And the fact is that I am Jamaican, that's what I know, and these are the people and the stories that I know. Or I should say I'm Caribbean, because a lot of those stories, you know, our stories they're all connected. It's a big Caribbean story, it's a black story, it's a diaspora story, and that's what I'll continue to write.
Beautiful answers. I feel wholeheartedly both ways, which is interesting. Like Desmond said, he doesn't feel obligated, whereas Donna can't see herself being interested in anything else but her people, her hometown, and I can definitely see both. For me, as a Palestinian American, I've often felt like my identity was a curse. Like the word Palestine even since I was a child, growing up and watching the wars, 9/11, you know, I was a kid in 9/11, and I was in Brooklyn, so like I said, I went to an all-girls Muslim school, so we would go to school, we'd be wearing the hijab and the jilbab. And I've always felt like I was cursed to be Palestinian, that it was such a heavy responsibility that I carried. And I never grew up thinking I would write. I stumbled into that later. It was my form of self-expression, I think. But I think I would be leaning more towards how Donna feels, which is, it's such an immense privilege for me to have come for where I have come from, to have watched my parents struggle in the ways that they have struggled, the resilience of our women, these Palestinian women, the resilience of our men in diaspora trying to assimilate. Imagine coming from a refugee camp in the West Bank to New York City. Imagine having 9 kids in a 2-bedroom Brooklyn apartment. Imagine our parents, like we were so poor. I remember we would collect cans and go to the Key Food and put the cans in to get like nickels. And my mom would take all of us out and we would compete to see who could make the most money. So I actually came from a lot of trauma. And again, I never set out to be a writer. Like, I think our books choose us. We don't choose our books. We don't set out to write things. We follow our soul. A good writer follows her or his soul. And our soul leads us to where we're meant to explore. And for me, as a Palestinian, after I got educated and I was teaching other people's stories, I was teaching white stories, I realized our stories are not. I've never read a story about a Palestinian. I've never read, I don't go into the library and see stories that represent me, my childhood, whether as a Palestinian in Palestine or even as a Palestinian in the States. I had never read that. And I thought to myself, what an immense privilege for me and my parents and the backs of my ancestors that I am now standing on in this country to not go there, to not create that space for them, because in doing that, I'm creating a space for myself. And how can I open up my imagination to other things when I first haven't met myself? You know, in our stories, we have to meet ourselves, I believe. As much as I would have loved to pen a Harry Potter, okay? As much. And I've tried. But my soul was like, no, you're not here for commercial success. You're here because only you can tell the story. And you owe it to your ancestors to tell it. So I believe we have to pave the way for the people that are coming after us by honoring the people that came before us.
Those are all great answers, and I personally don't feel obligated like Desmond to write a Guyanese story, but because it's such a part of my identity, it's hard to write a story where you're writing what you know and to keep that out. I did try, though. This is my debut novel, but it's not the first novel I've written. I have a few shelved novels. And Harry Potter-esque novel. I sat down, I was like, I'm going to write Harry Potter. It was just this fantasy story idea. It was my first novel I wrote. It came to me, that story, there's a sort of generic brown person, which I'm sort of embarrassed to say, but I didn't write a Guyanese character because most people don't know, because you're Caribbean, most people don't know where Guyana is. They've never heard of it. And they would be interested. I mean, it's not represented. I never obviously saw a book about a Guyanese character because it just didn't exist. And mine's kind of one of the first to like put these women on a page. But people were interested, partly because it wasn't there. And I didn't sit down saying, oh, I need to put a character on the page that looks like me. Stories come to us, and it's a story that wouldn't leave me. And then I wrote it because I wrote it in COVID, and I thought we were all going to die, and I was never going to publish anything. I do feel a little pressure. In the beginning, I never felt any pressure, but now publishing houses brand us and readers brand us. I feel pressure to write another Guyanese story, and that's a little complicated. I'm writing something, and there is a Guyanese character, and it is part of the novel, but it's not mainly set in Guyana, and so people are going to like it. I don't know. We'll see. But that's an interesting thing, that branding. What do you write? Donna writes books about Jamaicans, and she wants to, and it's a huge part of our identity. And Etaf, you write about the Palestinian women experience. But and honoring your ancestors and your heritage, I totally understand and get that. But I also I also feel the pressure, which is an interesting and different thing.
Thank you. This has been such a rich sort of discussion, coming from many different points of view. And in closing, I'm reluctant to try and sum it all up because I think it's much too broad. So I just want to end by quoting Horace, the Roman poet from 30 BC, who said, "They change their skies, but not their souls, who run across the seas." Let's not erect artificial barriers between writers who have left and those who have stayed. Thank you very much for listening to us. And give our writers a big round of applause. Thank you.
Do people have questions? Oh, yeah, you have questions. Oh, do people have questions? Oh, you guys have questions?
Ladies and gentlemen, we have 11 minutes for Q&A. If anyone has... Sorry.
So I had so many thoughts as I was listening to your conversation. I thought about Sadia Hartman in her book, Lose Your Mother, talking about being a stranger in Ghana, I think she was, and being an outsider. I thought about Cynthia B. Dillard and her in Darkened Feminist Epistemology and talking about going back into her community after going to college and getting her degrees and having this experience of feeling like an outsider. And so I guess my question is kind of around survival in the sense of wanting to belong still within your community. I wasn't sure that I heard as much about that because I think we started with being outside of your community. But even though I own a bookshop in my, it's a new bookshop, so it's a little struggling. Don't go looking for the website yet. So even though I own a bookshop in my community, I've come back to my community. I've also had the experience of coming back to my community and forgetting that I need to sometimes code switch in order to make sense to the people who I'm supposed to be representing more generally to other people. And so I can go to the UK and get a PhD. To those people, I will always still be a little black girl from College Park, Georgia, trying to be something else. But going back to College Park, I am now changed. And I can never go back to being a little girl from College Park who grew up there, loved the place so much that she came back to try to find a way to stay a part of the community in a substantive and in a way that gives back. And I feel hyphenated, like you said, Etaf. And I feel lonely. And I want to write stories that my community can be proud of. And I don't know that I'm doing that. I know that you are proud of me because you said you were proud of me. And I know that other people are maybe proud of me, but they are not coming from where I'm coming from. And there's something disjointed that exists within myself. Sorry, I'm getting really emotional because I'm doing a lot of work and I don't feel like it is as meaningful as I want it to be. I don't feel like it's life-changing for the people whose lives I want to see them platformed and have opportunities like what I've had. So I just wonder if you have some thoughts kind of being hyphenated and still being in community but not of community, more specifically as writers, if that makes any sense. I just talked a lot. I hope what I'm saying makes sense.
Feel your pain, but you're creating a bookshop. That's like God's work, respect. The reaching out to the various communities, I think you write, what you feel at the time. Because it's like a long-term commitment, right? The first draft is just the writer telling herself what she's writing about. That's all it is, right? And that's a quote from a very famous writer, and I probably messed it up. But it's exactly that, right? And you just keep, if you're going to go through that crazy drafting process, which is what it takes to make a novel, right? A good one that gets out there and touches people. That then just has to come from your heart and your commitment. And if I read you, the varying pieces that are you choose the part that talks to you the most at that time. because to sustain yourself over a 2-3 year period to get that novel done, you know, writing is a very lonely business. And, you know, in order to get through all of that, you really have to have the passion for the work. So I would say, you know, just start on what you feel at the time, and, you know, all the different stages of you will come, but you have to, whatever you start out with, you have to really be committed for those first 2-3 years and get the process done.
Thanks. I'm going to take the opportunity to say something, because I think what I got from what you said is that you feel like you're frustrated because you can't see the difference that you're making, you know? It's not visible maybe, or tangible or measurable, but you are making a difference. And we can only do what we're driven to do, you know? And so clearly you were driven to start a bookshop for whatever reason, to write children's books. And you just have to keep doing that and do whatever else you're driven to do. It will make a difference, in my opinion.
I think too that there's this idea that you can never go back home, right? And I think that all of us grow and we change. And when I look at and I think about my 3 books, the person I was when I wrote my first book is not the person who wrote the 3rd book, and is absolutely not the person who's writing the 4th one. And I think that makes a big difference, that we as writers change, our stories change, and so our expectations that when we go back home, or the way in which readers see our stories, that should also change. Because each story has its own audience, or each book has its own audience. And there's, in some cases, the people who loved your first book may not love your second and your third, because you have grown and you have changed and you're telling a different story. And I think that's just a really beautiful thing, because that is how, one, not only you grow as a writer, but you're, that's the legacy you're leaving. And if you're doing the same thing over and over, then people are going to leave you because they have already read that story. So I think it's something we just have to embrace. It's part of life, and that's who we are.
Well, first of all, I think you're extraordinarily brave. And it takes a really beautiful soul to want the amount of meaningful, you know, connection and community that you do. So to acknowledge that, because not everybody has this deep, deep desire to make a change, and to be so distraught by it. Like listening to you saying, you know, you went to get that PhD, you changed as a person, you came back, you feel hyphenated, you feel lonely. I struggle with that as well. I have an immense, even now, feeling of like alienation, like I don't belong in any room that I'm in, like I always have to put a mask on for the room that I'm in. And then there's this deep burden, and I think women, creative women, women from hyphenated identities have this burden of like wanting to give back and wanting to pave the way. And you're doing that just by having that desire. Like just the fact that you have that desire is doing it. I felt it in 5 minutes of talking with you. Like you changed me just by talking to you. I think we often have been conditioned to think that creating meaningful community or making impact needs to look really big. I need to make this big business or hit this blockbuster book. It's not like that. And in terms of fitting in with your community, I'd like you to ask yourself a better question, which is, we spend so much of our time seeking validation from the places that made us, or the places we're trying to prove ourselves to. Like, I'm not that girl from Atlanta, I'm now Dr. Brianna. You know, the subconscious need for validation, but true contribution, and this is for every single person in this room, true contribution comes from making peace with and accepting yourself fully. Telling yourself fully that you're exactly where you need to be, that you've done exactly the best that you could do. And in that acceptance of yourself, because we are so hard on ourselves. We are so hard on ourselves. Look at all you've done, and then the pain that I see coming from your voice, like you haven't done enough. You're a badass. You have done so much. And it's that pressure that I hold to myself as well. It's because there's an internal split inside. The part of us that wants to belong to where we came from, and the part of us that has already evolved. And making peace with that, and loving yourself, and writing the book, opening the shop for yourself. It has to be for yourself. And I don't mean this in an egotistical way. What I mean is, it needs to come from what your soul wants to do, why you're here. That's why we write. That's why we write for 2-3 years. Nothing can sustain that kind of work unless it's truly coming from a self-aligned place first. Then after that, it will resonate with the people around you. Because you can never be split inside and make an impact outside. You have to make the impact inside. The work is inside. It's not in our communities, it's internal work. All of our work is internal work. And you've done everything externally. And now it's time to go back inside to Brianna and love her and cherish her and treasure her for all the work that she's done. Because you're incredible. And I'm so proud of you.
Well, I don't know if I could add any more to that. That was a great answer, and I totally agree. And what a great question about being fractured. And I mean, what is it they say? You can't step in the same river twice because the water is always moving. So you left, you came back, you feel fractured, you feel this imposter syndrome. You're an imposter at home, you're an imposter away from home. But what Etaf was saying is we all, on some level, feel that, even the people around you who stayed. And if you lean into that truth of who you are, especially when you write, it will resonate. It will resonate. And I wrote a story that I made up a lot of stuff, but I leaned into truth when in honesty on a sentence level and feeling level. And it's shocking how many people reach out and say, that's my story, even if it's not the details. That's my story. And so write from that place and own it. Own it.
We're out of time. Thank you so much. You've heard extraordinary testimony from these writers who are on stage with me. None of us are household names, so, and we probably never will be. But look at the quality of the work. And that's what it's about, right? That's what it's all about. Thank you.
Testing, testing. These mics are working.
Yeah, you're going to do something with it too, right?
Yeah, well, actually. Lady Mac. Lady. Oh, testing. Lady Mac. Miss Monique, going to sing something for us for like 5 minutes, 10 minutes. She's singing for us. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Just we have before our next panel. For our next panel, we have a little musical interlude. We have the Calypso Monarch of the Virgin Islands.
Testing.
Oh, that was the introduction. That was the introduction, right?
Ladies and gentlemen in the audience, I want to direct your attention to our next performer. Our Lady Mac is a mathematics teacher at, what school are you at now? We used to be colleagues at Arthur Richards. Where are you now?
I am retired.
Are retired, wow. Okay, so Lady Mac is the Calypso Monarch of the Virgin Islands. So she's going to sing her latest Calypso for us.
Yeah, thank you. No, not yet. Ms. Alsace invited me to sing a song for you so that, you break up the little panel discussion. I did enjoy the panel discussion. And I don't just want to come on and then sing the song, so I want to say that I did enjoy the conversation, and I feel like I fit in because Calypsonians are writers also. Yeah. And you write about what's in your heart, and you also write about what people need to hear. And we take enjoyment that after we write a song, that some people agree with what you've sung, some may not. But I take pride in not really looking towards winning the crown, but that I come up with an idea, I write my thoughts out, sing my melody, of course, take it to somebody else to write the music, that's not me, and present it as I want to on stage without bussing. No, I don't know about not bussing today. I haven't sung these songs for a while. The first one is called Calypso in Me. I like to sing that as an anthem whenever I perform. So let me see if there's any other note put down here. Oh, I wanted to mention about AI. I'm supposed to compete on the 17th, and I started putting in my thoughts into the AI chat GPT stuff, and they came up with some stuff for me, but it's not me. It robs you of your creativity. You need to write from your heart or your head. Yes, you may have a first draft, second, third, and then eventually you have to say, no, let's go. It's good enough. And so that is what I've done with my the third song I'm going to sing for you today. It's not the full song. I'm going to sing the first verse. We get to it. Let's do the first song. Ding, 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 ding. Calypso to velvet to calypso, our culture is also. My ancestors contribute to the art form. Let it be told, bronze, silver, or gold. Although they don't crown me, this stage is where I'll be. Calypso I feel, from the head down to the heel. So don't ask me if I'm in the calypso, 'cause calypso, they're in me. I feel like gold, it's deep in my soul. Calypso, calypso, culture on the stage. This is my faith, calypso in the veins. Calypso, calypso, calypso in the veins. Yeah, ding, 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 ding. Telmac to Blinky to Derby. We got a rich history, treasure our history, love our culture, keep tradition alive in our song. To Pelchi and Princey, forever will back me. Calypso I say, take me worries all away. So don't ask me if I'll win the Calypso, just to sing is victory. I feel like gold, it deep in my soul. Calypso, calypso, culture on the slate. This is my fate, calypso in my veins. Calypso, calypso, calypso in my veins. Yeah, man. Y'all could sing to and loosen up. At least the word calypso you would know. Ding, 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 ding. Preserve calypso on an island if you truly are a fan. Treasure our history, love our culture. We keep tradition alive through our songs. Music's a tradition, part of our occasion. Calypso, I pray, will never ever go away. I'm so happy, 'cause I got me calypso. If you love it, sing with me. I feel like gold, it deep in my soul. Calypso, calypso, culture on its slate. This is my fate, calypso in my veins. Calypso, calypso, calypso in my veins. Ding, 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 ding. I'm feeling the rhythm from Africa that we ancestors bring ya. It is drum, the voice, and the story to tell. Listen to sweet, sweet melodies. You put down your papers, turn out for satire. We communicate lyrics of news and gossip. Think how empty would festivities be without calypso? monarchy. I feel like gold, it deep in my soul. Calypso, calypso, culture on the slate. This is my fate, calypso in my veins. Calypso, calypso, calypso in my veins. Calypso, calypso, calypso in my veins. Calypso, calypso, calypso in my veins. Thank you. You enjoyed it, so I'll sing the next one then. The next one is entitled, hold on, First of the Month. What do you think when you hear first of the month? So this song came about with when I had a conversation with my students about what was coming up on the first of the month. And they got the answer wrong, of course. So the song will tell you about it. Before I go on, I need to mention that my last year of teaching, I was at Complex. So to answer that, and I did write the jingle, welcome to Barra Nation. Yeah. Yeah, I bled blue for my last year of teaching. Of course now, I'm a Carib. Yeah, I graduated from Central High School. And for the rest of you, UVI alumni, of course. Okay. Oh, this one have the lyrics, but it's good because I might forget that one. There. Lyle. As a teacher, you get in the minds of children. Just listen to my last discussion with them. It bothers me when we have a holiday. Love the time off and screw from work to play. We don't even think about our ancestors. Don't remember how they fight for us. We celebrate some on the first Monday. Who can tell me when we celebrate this day? Who want give thanks to who paved the way? Stand up, but that's when Tamika said. The first of the month, that's a wonderful day. The first of the month, it's the food stamp day. The more children, more money you make the first of the month. Thanks to who paved the way. The first of the month, that's the food stamp day. The first of the month, watch out, don't get in the way. The first of the month, let's just take that, don't care how much upon the first of the month. Thanks to who paved the way. This song makes me laugh, I'm sorry. Hi, Lyle. Darling Tamika, that's not what I had in my mind. I'm talking about people who help mankind. Hamilton Jackson, or call him Black Moses. On the first start, the herald for the masses. We used to suffer. Things weren't easy back then. We work low wages and poor working condition. That is a man who fight against oppression. To him we owe our freedom of expression. Give thanks to him who paved the way. You know what Tamika still gonna say. The first of the month, that's the food stamp day. The first of the month. The first of the month he part. My black Moses help push the cart. The first of the month, thanks to who paved the way. The first of the month is the food stamp day. The first of the month. It's freedom to shop. 1 cart, 2 cart, fall right to the top. The first of the month, thanks to who paved the way. Yay! Laile! My dear students, our history is so important. We learn lessons from past generation. Louis Buckley Rhodes enacted laws for our workers. Hamilton Jackson is a local role model. Labor leader, judge, editor, attorney. That is why he's honored officially. Tamika said the two are tied in one. Both of these things begin with a depression. Somebody fight to help the needy families. And that is why they choose the first to give we. The first of the month is a wonderful day. The first of the month. Look at cigar, soup, beer, and wine. Let's switch. I pay yours, you pay mine. The first of the month. Thanks to who paved the way. The first of the month. That's the food stamp day. The first of the month. Put your things on the belt, we'll pay. Just give we cash for we nails and hair. The first of the month. Thanks to who paved the way. Okay, gotta cut it off. Aye. Okay, so I have a stop right now, so you can get a sneak peek of my other song. Aww, right?
Sorry about that. I think standing a little too close. Anyway, I wanted to take a moment to recognize the volunteers. When we break for the afternoon, they're available even now to take you wherever you need to go. Those of you who are not familiar with the campus, the volunteers are here. Thank you, Ms. Espinosa, for agreeing to take care of that particular section. We also want to, I didn't mention the members of the committee. We always work so hard and then we forget to honor our own. And the members of the committee are here. Could you stand? Those of you who work on the committee, please stand. There's Regina Keels, Cleon Lynch, Douglas Canton, always abidingly working with us behind the scenes. Diane, Diane Levans, the back there, our secretary, treasurer. Yvette McMahon, my right hand. And of course, we have Michelle Crispin. Michelle Crispin is convalescing right now. She is not well, but she would have been here to decorate the room and to help with the green room. So we want to send out a special prayers for her as she tries to get well. And Mr. Jeremiah is right now working somewhere on our behalf, but she's also a stalwart here, members of the committee. And we have a number of people in the community who we call on when we need help. So I want to thank those people who are here as well. Ms. Blanchette, my colleague in the College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences. Dr. Kahina, who got some volunteers for today. I want to thank everybody, and I'm hoping I'm not leaving anyone else out. We always have people like Ms. Anthese Kader, and we could always call Dr. Corbin for anything. And then if you say, can you come on island to do so? And so he may be in Singapore or some far-flung place, and he will tell you, well, I'll try to do it so and so and so. And Dr. Sekou, he never says no also to us. And I just pulled in Dr. Wenner, so he's going to be also one of those people that we're going to call. And of course, Amina Salim, who I can always reach out to. And every year, Monique Glendinning, she almost knows that she's on the spot every time to come and help us. So I thank you very much, members of our committee, and our sponsors, and the green room. The green room. Those of you authors who want to take a drink, and there's some things in the green room to eat, you can go in there and have some snacks. We're going to run into lunch, so we brought lunch for everybody. So you have lunch. There's a brown bag lunch. Okay, so we're going to go run into lunch, so you can have lunch. Those of you who are the authors, the green room is specially prepared for you for little finger stuff. We have to remember our sponsors because they're the reason for us being able to do what we do. Buccaneer Hotel. The Buccaneer is a beautiful resort, and everybody loves to be at the Buccaneer, and the Buccaneer takes very good care of us. Every year, Elizabeth Armstrong always says, Alcest, I will always support the VI LitFest. So that's good to know that we always have somebody on our backs, holding our backs. Then we have Diageo, the UVI RT Park, St. Croix Foundation for Community Development is our fiduciary, and a place where we go to when we need support. Is Deanna James here? Okay, Deanna. Tomorrow, if you come tomorrow, we'll have you speak because we're kind of running out of time, but I wanted to take some time to mention our sponsors. And Department of Tourism, always at our back. I know that Shamari Haynes is here on behalf of the Commissioner. Commissioner told me last night that she would be going to see trade, so she wouldn't be able to make it, but she made it last night to the reception. And then we have the schools, the Department of Education, and the UVI School of Agriculture. And Charlene Spencer, who is my admin at the Caribbean Writer, and also one of the two people in the secretariat for the LitFest. We make it seem like we have a big staff. It's only two of us there. And then we can call other people to help us. And the members of the committee, they're always on standby. And when 2 or 3 weeks, a month before the festival, they come in full gear. So we thank you very much, and thank those of you who are joining us for the first time. And okay, you tell them. And then after this, we have Ms. Glendinning. You have the stage. If you're hungry, you can get a brown bag lunch in the back, or you can wait until after the panel discussion. We'd like that. Okay?
And just quickly for our guests, the green room is just right behind this building. You just go out, walk along there, go in the door, and as you get in the door, it's the first door on the right. I think it's room 133, but I'll verify that, okay? You can get refreshments there and just sit and relax a little bit.
You also forgot a sponsor that's very, very important, and the Daily News. Eunice Bedminster is here with Curtis Walcott, and I knew Curtis Walcott when he was in high school. His father and I worked together at Martin Marietta when I worked at Martin Marietta as a journalist. So it's always good to see him. He looks exactly like his dad. I haven't seen him in many years. Thank you, Eunice, for coming. Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to turn the mic over to Ms. Clendenin. Can get your panel together. And I'll just check in the back if anybody wants to grab lunch and kind of monitor that while you set up, okay?
Invite the gentlemen who are going to be on the next panel to join me here at the front, Dr. Wenner, Dr. Sekou, and Dr. Corbin. You just want to sit here? Good morning, everyone. My name is Monique Clendenin Watson, and I am going to moderate the next panel. I'd like to say that the early panel was very inspirational. It focused in on us as Caribbean people on an intimate level. We enjoyed Lady Mac's performance as well because, again, it focused in on our very local issues, the way we look at things intimately. This panel kind of pulls us out and we begin to look at Caribbean identity from a wider lens. So to begin, and I'm a person that reads a lot, so please excuse me, I do speak extemporaneously, but I write and I read, so excuse me here. So good morning and welcome to our panel on Caribbean identity and self-determination in a changing world. Policy, advocacy, art, and the ties that bind us. So what does Caribbean identity and self-determination mean as we enter the second quarter of the 21st century? What does it mean for our archipelago of islands from Cuba to Trinidad and Tobago that border the million-mile Caribbean Sea from the north and east? What does it mean for the countries of South and Central America that border the Caribbean from the south and west? What does it mean for the people of our Caribbean region that share a common origin story but remain fractured by language and political affiliation and governance structures? What does it mean for the sovereign states, territories, and dependencies that were once settled in the geopolitical realities of the 20th century, but that are now facing the current Cat 5 winds of change that threaten our relationships with each other? What does Caribbean identity and self-determination mean in a world that is moving towards autocracy? How do island nations and territories maintain autonomy and identity? How do governments position themselves for the best outcomes of their people? And how do we as Caribbean people respond to these challenges in the policies that govern us, in how we advocate for those of us who live in the region and in the diaspora, and in our art, that which expresses our essence, our soul, our mythology, who we believe that we are. With us today to explore these topics and begin an honest dialogue are our esteemed panel that includes, to my right, Dr. Carlisle Corbin, who is a senior analyst in the Global Dependency Studies Project Expert Group. He is a United Nations independent expert on decolonization and Executive Secretary Emeritus of the Council of Presidents of the UN General Assembly. He is the former Minister of State for External Affairs for the U.S. Virgin Islands government and was a member of the Territories Commission on Status and Federal Relations. He has been a lecturer in international affairs at the University of the Virgin Islands Global Leadership Institute and lecturer in dependency governance studies at the University of Guam. He is the originator of the self-governance indicators assessment mechanism used by territories globally. He is the co-author of the self-determination study conducted for the Guam Commission on Decolonization. His most recent book, Evolution of French Colonialism, a Political and Constitutional Analysis, was published in 2024. Please welcome Dr. Corbin. To my far left is Dr. Malik Sakou. Dr. Sakou is a professor of political science and history at the University of the Virgin Islands. He holds bachelor's and master's degrees in social science from the University of the Virgin Islands and a doctorate in political science from the University of Delaware. Dr. Sakou has worked extensively as an analyst, educator, and consultant on Virgin Islands political issues, specifically as they relate to the political self-determination. He's a sought-after writer, speaker, and commentator on the issue of political status and constitutional development, having worked on various initiatives by the Virgin Islands people over the past 40 years to choose a political status and adopt a U.S. Virgin Islands Constitution. He has served as an elected member of the Board of Education and has sought public office in the Virgin Islands legislature and as lieutenant governor. Recently, he has advocated adopting the revised Organic Act of 1954 as a baseline constitution for the territory, which can later be amended locally to fit the community's needs, and has worked to publish an accessible, plain language ebook of the revised Organic Act of 1954. Dr. Sakou. Dr. Mark D. Wenner, to my left, is a professor of economics at the University of the Virgin Islands, and he has over 30 years of experience as practicing international development economist. His areas of specialization include fiscal analysis, public debt management, microfinance, and trade policy. Dr. Wenner's distinguished career features service as the chief economist for the Virgin Islands government, as well as 21 years with Inter-American Development Bank. In addition, he has held positions at ABT Associates, the USDA Economic Research Service, and Trans-Africa. Dr. Wenner is a prolific author, having published more than 140 works. His publications span a range of formats, including books, chapters, technical papers, peer-reviewed journal articles, magazine articles, blogs, short stories, poems, and editorial. His professional endeavors have taken him to 33 countries across Latin America, Africa, and Asia. Dr. Wenner earned his PhD in agriculture and applied economics from the University of Wisconsin. He holds an MA in economics from the University of Notre Dame and a BA in economics and government from Georgetown University. Welcome, Dr. Wenner. So I'd like to start by turning to Dr. Corbin to have him give his assessment of our theme.
Well, good morning. Good evening in Guam, where they're facing a typhoon in the next several days. So please take a minute because we know what that means. The theme is very important. identity and self-determination. I'm not sure how much I'm going to introduce it, but on the basis of our identity in the Caribbean, it's very, very fragmented. At the same time, it is one. And it's fragmented on the political side. Self-determination, part of the description is related to the fact that we have countries and territories. And countries operate at a different level than territories, and countries have different challenges than territories, particularly as we move forward. Now, countries and territories bringing together the self-determination, there are those of us in the Caribbean that are incomplete in the context of our self-determination. We've arrived at a level, and some would indicate that we have stagnated. The last country to become independent in the Caribbean was St. Kitts and Nevis, 1983. So how long ago is that? And there have been no changes in the region since that time. So the idea of stagnation is very real, and we discuss this at the United Nations on a regular basis. So the idea of identity, clearly we are all within the context of the Caribbean, but at the same time our issues of self-determination are vary significantly.
Thank you. Dr. Sekou.
Good morning again. Dr. Corbin and I have worked in the Status Commission years ago. At that time, he was my boss, and I was a very young, very ambitious Associate Director of Education, Public Education, and Political Status. I see things differently. I believe the modern or the contemporary Caribbean is going through a phase. From my point of view, as a political scientist, the Caribbean has a contradiction. As a basin, not just the islands, as a basin, there's a level of cultural unity. I think we take it for granted. Whether it is Belize, Honduras, parts of Colombia, Panama, when it comes to music, our foods, our lived reality, in many respects, we're very similar. And as Dr. Corbin mentioned, the politics, I think the politics is much more complex. Not only are we divided based upon whether we are independent or somewhat freely associated or outright colonies, also we are divided ideologically. And ideologically, that's a tough topic. I tell my students all the time when I talk ideology, I'm careful that I'm not arrested and deported to El Salvador because how the climate is today, but I'm ideologically to the very far left, far left, and proudly so. I tell people I'm as far left from the MAGA as East is from the West. I believe they're more centrist than me over here. But I want to talk about the political status issue. The Virgin Islands has a unique situation. I've said this in the past, I'll say this again. Our brains want one status. Our hearts want a different status. Our stomachs want a third status. But our soul needs a different status. Our Caribbean soul demands a status that gives us some level of power. We must have some level of power over our destiny, our situation. The difficult thing is that there's a separation among our people in which way to go. We have no consensus on this issue. And this is where we have a real struggle. I believe other islands, such as Puerto Rico, are somewhat in a similar situation. They're like us. And I believe the CARICOM countries might have decided to be sovereign, but ideologically they are now split because of what's happening up north. So we really have a complex situation. I'm very confident, I'm very hopeful and optimistic that what we're going through now in the Caribbean is merely a passing cloud and not a powerful typhoon or hurricane. So I'll say no more. And by the way, Ms. Watson, that question had 10 questions in one, you know. That theme, you have like 10 dissertation questions in one, so it's really a tough question. But I believe the Caribbean issue, the identity issue is really present for us because in 2026, we have a struggle in the Virgin Islands deciding which way we will go as a people of the Virgin Islands.
Well, good morning, everyone. In regard, okay. Yes, good morning. Okay, much better now. yes, in order to build on what my two colleagues have said, yes, the Caribbean does have a sort of a common cultural affinity, a set of shared traditions, music, heritage. You know, the vast majority of the people, we are basically a region where four peoples came together. Europeans, Africans, indigenous people, and Asian people. And so we are this fusion of peoples and of traditions and of customs and of languages. However, when we move into the political realm, um, this history of fractionalism, we basically had 5 colonial masters. We have 4 major linguistic groups. We have the Spanish, we have the Dutch, we have the French, and the Anglophone. And so these barriers, these political barriers, these colonial relationships that we've had, or even now in the era of independence, we still have neocolonialism. The CARICOM, 17 CARICOM countries may be sovereign, but they're all neo-colonies. And you can just see it in the way how the Prime Minister of Trinidad is acting, and Trinidad and Tobago inviting military presence, siding with the Trump agenda, fracturing the CARICOM, how Guyana is basically signed on to become a protectorate of the United States. ExxonMobil runs Guyana. and so the mass is falling off. The CARICOM countries are not independent. They're neo-colonies. And so when you talk about the 13 countries that are overseas departments, territories of metropolitan countries, we can't even have a discussion and about where to go. As Malik so eloquently said, the belly is saying stay with America because we are economically unviable. But our head is telling us we need to be free. We need to be able to determine our future. We need to have a say. And so we are stuck. You know, we're economically unviable. We're mismanaged. We can't go forward. We live on the federal dole. And you repeat this with the other territories. You go to Martinique and Guadeloupe, massive amount of out-migration that goes to the metropolitan areas. Massive amounts of money spent on housing subsidies. And so I won't go on with that. But what I'd like to kind of maybe challenge us or focus on is the importance of culture. Because after all, we're in a literary festival, and there should be some connection. And culture is very important. And I think although we have superficially common features in our culture, we may have very strong island identities, but we do not have a strong Caribbean regional identity, and that's what's killing us. That's what's preventing us from moving forward. And so you see that manifest in, say, right now, in the split of CARICOM. We have lost solidarity. We are identifying and willingly trying to appease and curry favor with a metropolitan power that's outside of the region for economic benefits. And we are basically sacrificing a regional organization that was seeking integration and seeking unity on that. And so to me, that's a clear evidence of a lack of culturally driven and inspired leadership. And so we really need to work on that. And so how do we build a regional Caribbean identity? We have to invest in education. We have to learn not only our own history, our own music, our own cultural products, but we need to learn those of others. And so I teach at University of the Virgin Islands, and I love Bad Bunny, and I speak Spanish. I've lived in Spanish countries for over 20-odd years. And I was shocked, for example, that my students did not know who Bad Bunny was. And Puerto Rico is 40 miles away. And it struck me, the division of not speaking Spanish. Can't understand his lyrics. But yet, when he blew up, and he's really demonstrated to all of us how culture can be a source of pride, authenticity. Culture can be a source of economic advancement and of even political mobilization. And so that is an example of how culture is very important, but it has to begin with us knowing our history, our individual history, our regional history, knowing our literature, our poetry, our music, but also the literature, music, and poetry of the island next door, of the Dutch islands, of the French islands. Okay, and so that is the base. So when you become to a position of political power, you need to have solidarity. You need to understand that we are all alike. We all had common history and common challenges, and we have to seek unity in order to confront external pressures. And so I see that is the challenge with us moving forward in this area. Thank you.
Thank you. I have to, it makes me wonder, especially in light of the current situation that the whole world is in. The old African proverb about when elephant fights, you know, the ants, the grass suffers, and I would say the ants suffer too, because we're literally the ants in, you know, as these elephants stomp and do what they're doing, and but whatever they do affects us in many ways. So what is our posture, whether we're an independent country or we're an island nation or a territory like the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico? What do we do? What is our posture in the current environment? I'll start with Dr. Corbin.
Well, very dynamic question. I think my colleague mentioned CARICOM and its challenges, and I think certainly one of the things that we must recall is that CARICOM is really the premier institution of the region. So anytime it is under stress, then it becomes all of our problems. Although even as we are not part of CARICOM as U.S. Virgin Islands, although British Virgin Islands is an associate member of CARICOM and moving toward full membership. That gives you a distinction in terms of the level of advancement, the level of autonomy that we refer to. Whereas in my time, during the time I was in government, we had a very strong push for integrating with CARICOM and the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, as well as the Association of Caribbean States. But our friends in the State Department thought otherwise, and the British Virgin Islands moved forward and piggybacked on much of what we were doing and succeeded, because the British have a different perspective as to their colonies in the Caribbean. There are 6 British territories. 2 of them are self-sufficient, including the British Virgin Islands and Bermuda. So both of those, unsurprisingly, have on their platforms the issue of eventually becoming independent. The others have settled into a situation of dependency and almost have come to the stage of accommodating it and legitimizing it. And I think that's part of the issue that relates to the U.S. Virgin Islands in the context that we have legitimized and accommodated what we have for all of the reasons that Dr. Sekou mentioned. We have differences of our anatomy in terms of which part we should follow. But of course, the question of controlling and having a say in terms of what happens to us, what we've called in dependency governance studies as unilateral authority, which exists over us. And that's the issue which will continuously be in play as long as we are remaining in this context. So when we're discussing now the 2 issues of the Constitution, and I note from the introduction, Dr. Sekou, the reference to the adoption of the Revised Organic Act, which initially I had a knee-jerk reaction to that. And in retrospect, perhaps reading your work, it also made it almost even to give it a second look. Because, of course, we're moving in a different direction right now. And we're moving with a draft constitution, would be a proposed constitution once it is adopted. The question, of course, how does that differ from the Organic Act? Is it permissible for it to be anything different? in terms of any autonomy that might be suggested. And because we know what happened in the Fifth Convention, where there were some items there that certainly did exceed the parameters of the current arrangement under the Revised Organic Act, and those were effectively objected to at several levels. So your proposal there, seems more palatable. But my only concern is once the process completes, however we do it, the matter of recognizing that this is not the end, that this is in fact a step, but yet we need to deal with the question of our relationship with the United States and with the world. And what would that be? Will it remain a territory with a constitution versus a territory without a constitution? I think this is an important element from my perspective.
Dr. Sickle?
For the benefit of the audience, Ms. Watson has very good English, but I want to amend something. What I proposed was to adopt the Revised Organic Act with its amendments. The Organic Act in 1954 was amended 8 different ways. And the proposal was to basically adopt what was in front of us during the Joe Biden administration, because I had foreseen there was going to be a change. I mentioned this repeatedly to the public over and over. It was very clear that the right wing in America won the offensive. And this was the low-hanging fruit. And many of the people who disagreed with me didn't consider that there'd be a second Donald Trump era, and they didn't foresee it had been more far right. But all the indication was there from before that whenever the Republicans become empowered, they'll be more far right, and the very little autonomy that we had can be taken away from us. And the activist community couldn't see it coming. And as Crucians talk, it's here now in front of us. No one can think that even what little we have can be taken from us. And even more, I don't want to negotiate with the present administration. So why put in a document that had 9 areas of concern to negotiate with the second Trump administration? This is what I'd warned the community, that it's in front of us. Now it's here, and I don't know how we're going to deal with this. And I agree with you, Dr. Corbin. This wouldn't be the end. This would be the beginning. To adopt it doesn't mean you end anything. In fact, it's a new journey, because now you have to go back to the old issue of political status. Where do we go? I think most Virginians, most Virginians seem to want somewhat of a modified, freely associated kind of entity. Most Virginians want to maintain U.S. citizenship, but even that can be questioned. If you know, nowadays things will just change. In fact, I don't want to frighten anyone, but some of the people who are in this administration may want to roll back the territorial powers and citizenship. So it is in our best interest to consider what do we do to protect our self-interest. And this is a long-term, comprehensive issue. It has to be discussed. And if we don't discuss it, it'll be discussed against us, because there are people up north who are discussing these issues right now. This might be a surprise to you in this audience, but there are people in the United States government who would like to roll back the citizenship of people in territories. That's a discussion right now. So it's not far-fetched. We have a discussion of our own, asking ourselves, how do we project our best interests now, today, 2026, into the next decade? One last comment I'd like to make is, in 2027, that's next year, we'll mark the 100th year of U.S. citizenship. It would be a tragedy if that's the year that our citizenship is rolled back as territorial citizens, territorial residents, because there are people who are questioning whether or not, if you're a territory, if you're a child of an immigrant, if you have certain ethnic groups. In fact, the lady from the Palestinian American mentioned about her history, but there are people who would like to reverse the citizenship of people of Muslim countries or Arab countries or African. I mean, there's a movement in the States that wants to really change the demographics of America. So we here in the VA having a discussion on status isn't far-fetched, it's not anti-American, it is, in essence, it's pro-VI. It is far-sighted, it is wise, and it is a necessary discussion for today. So what I'm proposing is that if you make a small step towards adopting the Constitution for now, that doesn't mean it's the end of the road. It's the next step on a long journey forward towards self-determination.
Dr. Warner?
No, I won't add any to that. I mean, no, yeah, I think, you know, this whole question of trying to draft a document to improve. I see the Constitution and the role of a Constitution. It's a mechanism to define the rules of the road. It's define your liberties, your rights, to separate powers, to create checks and balances, to basically decide what is your structure of governance, and to have some mechanisms for accountability, impeachment, recall, etc. So I think it's a very basic and important document, and we, as a territory, we should have a constitution, should move forward. It is not an end and be all, by no means, and I see it as a means more of how to help perfect government in that regards. I see the revised constitution of the revised organic code of 1954 as basically an obsolete, archaic document. It is what you call a strongman constitution. And if you were to take governor and substitute it with naval administrator, we're back in 1930. There's no change. It is basically all it did was take out naval administrator and put in governor. We do have a council and a senate, which they didn't have back then. But the point I'm saying is that revised constitution document is an extremely colonial document. It concentrates too much power in the chief executive, and we need a document that you know limits and establishes strong independent institutions and good separation and checks and the balance of power. And the revised Constitution Act doesn't do that. And you can see that we've suffered from misgovernance for decades in this regard. In the question of whether we should go with a revised one with the ability to amend as we go, my fear is that given the control of the legislature, and we have a one-party system, one party is politically dominant. We have a political elite that is concerned about their interests and not the broad interests of the community, that it would never be amended in a way to really broaden and improve relationships, to give equity and accelerate development. So it's putting the fox in charge of the in-house, and I wouldn't expect amendments to come forward. If you maintain a very strong chief executive is not going to want to amend to reduce his or her power. So I don't think that that's a viable path. On the path of the question of the fear that, you know, we are facing a very extreme right-wing organization. We're moving towards authoritarianism. We have Stephen Miller in the White House, who is a modern-day Goebbels. He would take away our citizenship in a wink if he had it. So I think that is the issue that we're fearing. I'm hoping and praying. My hope is that the Supreme Court in June will uphold birthright citizenship. And I think the vote will be either 6-3 or 7-2. The only two people that I would bet my house on that's going to vote against this is Sam Alito and Clarence Thomas. But I think that there is enough votes, given the public questioning that they had, that birthright citizenship should stand in that regard. And but I think, you know, the bigger problem that we have here looking at the Virgin Islands is that I don't see any strong interest in the constitutional process. People have not really been following this. There hasn't been a lot of public enthusiasm, interest, participation in the process. We've seen glimpses of the first draft. The first draft, I think, is a very ambitious, aspirational draft. I don't know if it's very practical. It goes from the extreme of the naval administration of the 1920s and up until 31 that put all the power in a chief executive to micromanaging every single thing. So I don't know if that would be practical to be adopted, but I do like a lot of the things and the approach and the vision, and I think that the millennial delegates have done a wonderful job of trying to move us forward in this regard. The question is the practicality of governance. A constitution is not a kitchen sink. It's an outline. It's a blueprint. And you have to have agencies and senators and governors fill in the details. And I think this one goes too far. It says that the drainage got to be 6.2 inches, and you must use a mesh. It goes a little too far. But we'll see how the process holds out. My main concern is I think we as a people, at least in the Virgin Islands, are not politically mature. We're not serious, and we're being whipwashed. I think in the larger Caribbean, what I really fear and see is that we're losing our identity. We are basically small, vulnerable sets of island states, and we don't know where to go. Some people are saying, oh, we got to join Massa, and we got to appease Massa and curry favor, and others does betwixt of what to do. We're in a very difficult international environment where we're seeing the raw exercise of political power, military force, coercion, total disrespect for the principles of diplomacy, for dialogue, for consensus, for the rule of law. And so we're living in historic times. We're living in historic times. I go back again to these times where culture is important. Strong cultural identity, strong cultural grounding gives us resilience. We know who we are. We know that we have to fight. We have to join with others. We seek common ground with others. But if you don't have a sense of belonging, if you don't know your history, if you don't know what your ancestors did to gain inspiration from what they confronted, then we're going to be like, Antique Camilla in Trinidad. Thank you.
Thank you. The question occurs to me that, do we really have an infrastructure that supports this development, whether it's cultural or socioeconomic and even political? Because one falls into the other, right? It seems to me that we live in silos. We live in a silo, the generational silo. Those of us who are, I would venture to say 60 and older, and those who are 60 and younger. I'm in the former group, but I have a lot of friends in the younger group, and we do have conversations, but it seems like we're coming from different perspectives, and rightfully so, because the world changes and moves on. And like I try to tell people, the 21st century belongs to the young people. We just given them information so they could make good for the rest of it, right? But on the other hand, I feel like we had more infrastructure in my generation for us to communicate with each other, share ideas, come up with things. Even my grandparents and great-grandparents, they didn't have as much as we have, but they found a way to do it, right? So how do we find a way to do it, whether it's in the Virgin Islands or in the wider Caribbean at this moment?
Yes, it's not my cell phone. Well, first, I think we at times are too hard on ourselves, and then at other times we're not hard enough on ourselves. So the other day I heard this interview with Raymond James, with Neville James, about his rattan pole. Rattan pole is something that is scary for any candidate for governor, lieutenant governor. It's a very serious poll that he performed. And so, according to what I recall, he said that he asked questions to the respondents, and guess which issue is number one for the Virgin Islands? Was it native rights? Was it constitution? Was it political status? It was economic issues. Now, I could tell the poll wasn't done in St. Thomas because it would have been WAPA in St. Thomas. We in St. Thomas, we have gotten a very bad situation concerning electrical outages. We've had a water outage too. And I believe the average Virgin Islander is very much concerned with everyday living conditions, economic conditions, WAPA, and the roads, the crime. Our crime rates is among the highest. I think St. Thomas is worse than St. Croix. I think we have some bad people in St. Thomas. And I think if you deal with objective conditions, the average person may be so committed to overcoming the difficulty of everyday life. They view the Constitution as a remote topic, especially when it is crafted in a legal discussion. And then at times, I think many people, if they hear Mark and Malik go back and forth and we rough each other up, they might think it's too hostile or I disagree with somebody else. So I think the average person may think the topic is acrimonious, distant, abstract, and even more, the average voter observes that no political figure takes a position on these issues. In my lifetime, I don't recall anyone except Lorraine Berry in St. Thomas. And her view was to maintain a territorial option, but political parties, political entities here do not tackle this issue. Unlike Puerto Rico, where the parties are based on political status. So we have the perfect storm for the public taking a very negative view on this issue. And the infrastructure is in trouble. That's obvious for the world to see. I think it's in trouble because of the combination of hurricanes, poor leadership, lack of foresight, and we in the Virgin Islands not using the window of opportunity we had for the past decade to maximize these soon-to-be disappearing federal funds. The federal funds that we had gotten from the last hurricanes, they will not stay in some account for us forever. We, as a collective, not just one governor, as a collective society, a people, we've been unable to maximize a window of opportunity that is closing before our very eyes. So I think that's the challenge. And so we're in a tough place. However, I'm very optimistic that the younger folks who are even here will turn this around. I don't think it's left for the 60 plus, because I'm in a 60 plus massive.
Yeah. No, I agree with you that the conditions that we're in are not favorable for engagement, civic participation, for intellectual thought, for even political mobilization. I'm over 2 weeks. I've been struggling in St. Thomas, taking water out of my swimming pool in order to bathe. When you're trying to fetch water to bathe with after 21 hours without power, you can't think about the Constitution. Yeah, you can't think about the Constitution, and that is the reality. And I think Malik is hit it on the nose. But I think the one thing that I really see that we have to invest in is that we have to think above that, because I have to think, okay, here I'm drawing water out my swimming pool, and in order to bathe and go to work, and then I go to school and I lose 3 classes at university because power out, internet out, can't work, can't grade. I have to postpone all sort of assignments and give extensions and homework. It reduces productivity. It's hard. So how can you think about political change? And then I listened to the governor, and he told me I should be happy because we're not in Tehran and we couldn't be bombed. And then I think to myself, I'm glad at least they don't bomb a swimming pool, because then where would I be? And that attitude then pisses me off and say, we really do need to focus in educating people to realize that you're being gaslit, you're being insulted, that you do need to focus on what is a constitution, what is its role, why is it important, Why is it important to mobilize? Why is it important to change our political parties? Our parties don't work. Why is it important to vote in a new set of leaders, get rid of all the bald heads, so I don't have to bathe in the swimming pool? And it, no, but it's all connected. We have, I have to bathe in my swimming pool because we have a constitution that have a chief executive that's not performing well, but we have no provisions to remove him. There's no checks on him. WAPA does whatever he wants to do. We don't have any audits on WAPA. WAPA don't listen to nobody. You know, we can't even have a conversation about privatization because this belongs to we. You know, we have a false sense of pride. So this lack of political immaturity of not connecting all the dots leads us to me bathing in my swimming pool. And you know, we need to go beyond this. And so I think we need education. We need civics in the high school. We need to teach language so we can know Spanish and French and Dutch. We need literature. We need to read not only our local Virgin Island authors, but we need to read Derek Walcott, George Lamming. We need to Jose Marti. We need to read, you know, Spanish language, A.Z. Césaire. We need to learn that we all had the same history, the same challenges. We need to learn about our common humanity in order to be solid, in order to move forward. And so I think the first thing we really need to do is educate. The second thing is that we need to light the fire, political mobilization to really change political structures across the board. How the Trinidadians could elect a woman like Kamala, I don't know. You know, it's sad. You know, it's just like we're going back to slavery times. How could someone in Guyana say, I cannot renegotiate the contract with ExxonMobil when ExxonMobil is giving you $2 a barrel of oil when the standard fee is $12 to $14 a barrel of oil? That is pure neocolonialism. So how are we going to get over that if we don't educate, mobilize, build our common cultural identity? So I end there.
It seems to me in the metaphor about the elephants and the ants, when I think about ants, yes, they scatter, but ants are probably the most organized in beings, you know, in the universe. When they build tremendous infrastructure where the rest of us can't see it, but they're very organized, right? To get that piece of bread across from one part of the room to the other, they are organized, right? They are strategic. My question is, how do we become organized and strategic in this era? Because it seems to me that what we've been doing for the last 50 years is not going to work for the next 50, right? How do we become organized and strategic? Anybody want to take this one first?
I'll just begin by suggesting that we revisit the issue of collaboration with our neighbors, particularly in the institutions that exist that are available to us. One which we started in the Farrelly administration was the Inter-Virgin Islands Council, and that lasted through Governor Turnbull. And there was a continuous initiative to address the questions that are now arising between St. Thomas and Tortola regarding the voting issue. That was an issue that we had addressed early on, and with the limitation of the council not meeting on a regular basis, hence you develop problems. So there needs to be very formal links, very formal opportunities to address issues, because obviously this has impact on our economy and an impact on the economy of the wider region as well. Other institutions that the territory has belonged to, has participated in the past, is the United Nations organizations such as the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, which the territory has been an associate member of since 1984. There was a period of time when the territory had a high level of visibility, involvement, technical cooperation, collaboration with regional organizations, with countries in the region as well, of those organizations. However, that dissipated, and there's no longer that collaboration, so we lost that opportunity to discuss and to determine best case practices of others, where may have addressed some of the issues which we are currently facing. So those are the kinds of things that I would suggest, that we reevaluate our isolation and attempt to become more proactive.
I'm going to be a real professor. I think we need to have a political climate change. We have to really encourage a robust, honest discussion of the tough issues. In fact, even today is an example of what must be done. I was impressed with the previous panel. I was sitting next to my wife, Dr. Siku, and I told myself, we can't compete, you know. I was saying, Mark and Corbin, we're in trouble, because to hear the combination of insight, emotion, power. I felt it, you know. I said, well, if this is in church, I have to get up and say hallelujah, but it's not church. So I think where the Virginians is making its biggest setback, its biggest backsliding, is it has lost that climate of discussion we once had. In the 70s, when I was a child, 80s, 90s, there was a better climate in which there was a frank and honest discussion on the tough issues, not on the foolishness. What we find today is a discussion on nonsense, frivolousness. When it comes to foolishness, we are allowing that to dominate our thought. Anytime we have a healthy, wholesome discussion, whether it's in a literary festival, any conferences, and we really try to build the people's understanding, we're turning the tide. I want to emphasize that. I was a UVI student in the 1980s, and at UVI there was an Ideas and Issues program every Tuesday. I don't know if anybody remember that. And it's Ideas and Issues, they would invite these speakers from the community to come and reason. We need to have that kind of frank discussion over the issues. And then I want to get even more blunt. We need to revise the Status Commission. There was a commission on status that tackled the issues. We need to create an institution that has that ongoing task to always review the serious issues. And I want to give one last metaphor. I grew up in St. Thomas, and St. Croix is very flat, but in St. Thomas, when you want to build a house, most homes are to the side of the hill. So to build a house, you have to cut into the hill. You have to dig up into the ground, create a hole to create a cistern. You have to excavate. You have to build a cistern. You have to create a foundation. The foundation has to be level. The foundation is not level. I don't care how big a cistern you have. I don't care how strong a cistern you have. It is going to eventually have a weak house. And any earthquake, any kind of decay will cause that house to crumble. And then you don't plant mango trees, turpentine trees, mahogany trees around the cistern, because they'll crack the cistern. The same principle when it comes to political development. You have to create a strong foundation, even if it's costly, and make sure it is level, it's even, it's equitable, it's fair. And you don't plant trees, no shack tree, no mahogany tree around the cistern, because it will crack the cistern. And thus you have a strong house, a strong foundation. You could build several layers. I don't know how St. Croix homes are, because over here it's flat, and the homes are bigger here and nice, but I don't know what's the foundation. But the metaphor is that we need to create a political house, a political foundation that is so strong and so even and level, you can build a skyscraper. And that's my view for organization.
I second that.
So I would like to open the floor for questions. This topic is very wide, and from my viewpoint, all of us in the Caribbean are kind of like waiting for the other shoe to drop. I think that's where we are right now. None of us know what's going to happen. We know our position as a region that has always been heavily impacted by what happens in other areas. And we had come to a place where we knew, pretty much knew the lay of the land, and we knew how to move around it, maneuver around it. Right now, we don't know how to maneuver around what we have. The other thing I'll say before I turn over to the audience for questions is that there was a time when you could hear issues discussed on a Doc James show or an Addie Otley show, or radio played a big role in at least letting us hear who the players were and what their positions were, and we could form our opinions about where we stood on one side or the other of an issue, or a thought or a feeling. We don't have that anymore, right? Our children, and I have grandchildren, and they don't even watch TV. All they do is watch their phones, right? All they look at is what's coming up on TikTok. So we are in this vortex, I think, which not only of political change across the globe, but also technological change that has unfocused us. So how do we get back to a place where we connect again as humans? And art and literature is definitely one place to start, but I would like to invite the audience to ask questions.
Greetings, good afternoon. I want to thank the panelists for just as well as our interlocutor for sharing some context to what's happening here in the Virgin Islands in particular, but showing the connection to the wider Caribbean. So I wanted to, since we're at a LitFest, I like using literary references, yeah? I'm using a quotation from a book called The Great Camouflage. It was authored by the wife of Aimé Césaire, Suzanne Césaire. She wrote this in 1942. Why in the past have we been so unconcerned about expressing our ancestral anxiety in a direct manner? The urgency of this cultural problem escapes only those who are determined to put their hands over their eyes so as not to be disturbed from an artificial peace, and at any cost, even the price of stupidity and death. She was writing this in 1942 between Martinique, France, etc. And I think that everything that you all referenced spoke exactly to what we're dealing with now. So there's been issues and ideas and issues, initiatives done here at the University of the Virgin Islands, but it's sparsely participated in. It would be our students that we brought and gave extra credit to that came into the room. Let's just be very candid and frank, yeah? I think that this is, part of my question is, so what date are we reinstituting these particular things that are being referenced? And the reason I say what date, time, venue, etc., because there are some young people here. We call them millennials, whatever the terms, whatever they are, the ones that are younger than 45, I'll just say, that are actively doing these types of reasonings. But they have been forced into a stealth-like space, because when they speak their free mind, it's like, oh, you a rebel, rouse up. You trying to make fire burn. Oh, you don't know what you're speaking of because you don't have a PhD or an MFA or an MD or whatever, whatever. So we're not even listening to when they bring it. And sometimes by the time we listen, it becomes anger and rage, because we did produce warriors. And some of us are very comfortable. I like my children, and I like that they speak their minds. Sometimes a little bit brazen, a little bit almost bringing on disrespectful, but I think that my real inquiry, what are the dates and when are we doing this? And the example I give, at the Virgin Islands Caribbean Cultural Center, we bring this out. But we're very small. Most people don't know we're in here, and we're based inside of the College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences. And people do not want to come. Sometimes they see things on the wall that might frighten them, but I'm asking, share some dates and times as well as the platforms, because while we're getting WVI radio back up and running, we need the support of everyone in the room. Grateful.
So I agree we need to be practical, but I believe our response was for the broader issue. For the Virgin Islands, our challenge is even broader than just UVI. There's a a Generation Z. Let's come Generation Z. My granddaughter's generation. That's tough. And you said it correct. They're into what? TikTok, Instagram. They're into different kinds of digital modes that we have to adjust to. I believe that's the next step. That's the new frontier, is to reach that crowd, which I think we are doing. But I think my response was more towards the broader Virgin Islands as a society. Back in the 1980s, there's a young man called Dana Ori. I recall him, and then there were others in St. Thomas in particular, but somehow we've slipped up as a people. Yes, there are a few shows here in St. Croix. Mariam White still is a long-standing voice of consciousness. But overall, the mood has shifted to less serious discourse. And if you want to resolve, as you asked, how to deal with, building stronger organizations and responsible politicians and good political parties, the climate has to change. The climate is not right. And climate change is not just the sunshine and bad hurricanes. It is also a political climate. The climate has changed basically to the right. And it's a global issue. So I think that's our task. And I guess the all hands on deck approach we must use, where all the people who see positive things happening down the road, they have to step up and play their roles.
No, I can't really add much to him. I experience the same frustration. You hold brown bags, and there's more faculty than students. The only positive I see from my perspective, I'm saying, I share the same frustration as Dr. Chinzera, is that when you have events at university, you have many times more faculty than students there. And it's part of it is we suffer from being a commuter college. People are just very focused on coming, going to school. They don't have a lot of extra time. Most people work. But my hope is every 2 semesters, I see 2 or 3 future leaders, and they ask the right questions. And I'm just hoping that, we can galvanize that younger generation. And basically, I think the first step would be to start alternative political parties. Just, start new political parties to begin with, or run as coordinated independents. That would be this thing. We're going to run as independents, but we have a common platform, and we're going to work with each other. Because how it is here, once you got elected, is, you have one dominant party, and then everybody is free for all, and they're passing honorific bills. Nobody's talking about reforming anything. And there's not the votes to reform. So you're kind of stuck. When you have a protest against WAPA, 8 people come out, even though 14,000 people have been without power for like 15 hours. So that level of apathy and indifference, I just don't understand. I used to work in Chile. People would have burned down WAPA. Yeah, there would have been a payment strike. There would have been blockade, the entrance to the power plant. They would have demanded the resignation of the head of WAPA, the president, the governor, everybody. They don't play, but we take this. Yeah. So that's my hope, is new independent political mobilization and young people stepping up. The future is theirs. They have to see that it's at stake, okay? I think, unfortunately, most young people seem to say, let me get my degree and let me get out of here. So we need people to stay and create a new Firebun.
Any more questions? I think we have time for one more question. Or are there some student questions? Yes, I would really like some student questions.
One of my questions would be, what advice would you give to someone who is frustrated and overwhelmed to a child that is forgetting too many things in their life? What would your advice be for that person?
Okay, something I am curious about is if you could talk on or elaborate on how you feel education could be reformed, because I feel like education has, in certain ways, it hasn't developed the right mind to handle this political climate.
Thank you. You got the questions? Okay.
Let me get the easy one concerning stress. I'm going to give him the tough one. These guys are smarter than me, right? The easy one on stress is a combination. UVA has a lady named Dahlia Shadiran Felix, that's her name? Shadiran, rather. And her job is to deal with students going through those kinds of life challenges. She is specifically assigned that task. I would ask any student and faculty, if you're going through any kind of crisis, immediately contact her. In fact, last year she came to our area and she reminded us that's her role. So that is the easy answer. But besides that, there are other people in the community, social workers, whichever religious formation you belong to, go to the preacher, the imam, the priest, whomever, get all the help you can get. It's not just, sometimes stress is not just the psychological, it's also a need for a safe space, and utilize all people, whether it's yoga, whether it's spiritual, healthy living, you try everything to make sure that you're safe. Now I'm going to give it back to the guys to answer the difficult one.
No, yeah, the seek help, definitely anywhere and share, unload the burden. In terms of the second question, I sense it and I see it as a professor at university. I really believe there's a failure in the educational system. Critical thinking skills are not being taught. It's just memorization, do the minimum, keep quiet, discipline, fill in a piece of paper, move on. But there's no deep thought. And I teach hard subjects. I teach quantitative methods, statistics. And I see it because, people say, oh, God, I don't like math. Math's tough. I don't like it. And, when I get into it, I realize and I tell them that basically when you're doing statistics is logic. And, when you're working with a computer and it sends you back a syntax error, okay, you got to look to see what did you do wrong. You got to troubleshoot your code. And it's all logic, meticulous, detail-oriented logic. And that needs to be taught from the time you're a young person. And so, for example, I give you an example of a student that I had and knew and saw grew up. This person went out with his father sailing all the time, okay? And 11, 12, 13 years old. He's a classmate of mine, I'll tell you that. His name is Peter Humberg. He became the Silver Star winner in the 1988 Olympics in Seoul, Korea. So the Virgin Islands have only had two Olympic medal winners. And Peter was born here in the Virgin Islands, grew up in the ocean, and he started sailing, competitively sailing when he was 12 years old. The boat was more than him, weighed more than him. But he, in high school, was super, super bright in geometry and physics and science. Why? Peter was dumb. He did not like school. All he liked to do was hang out, talk, joke, sail. But Peter learned physics by sailing because you have to study the wind, geometry, physics, how much to let out the sail, how much to let it back in, the lofting, tacking. That is physics. So basically, he learned physics by doing. And that, to bring it full circle, our educational system is failing because it's not into experiential learning. So I have a farm, I bring kids up there, just hands-on. Is science in the field. Agriculture is science. And so we need that type of educational system to teach experiential learning, so it's in your bones, understand critical thinking, how to troubleshoot, how to use logic, and then every other thing falls in place. You know, everything else falls in place. Same thing with music. Music is math. The octaves, the harmonies, it's math. And so if you can do music, math is easy. And so I really do think we do need a tremendous reform in the educational approach of how you do it. The model to me would be Montessori. That's what Montessori do. You play to learn. You don't sit in a room and say, shut up, open up your book, read the first paragraph, you read the second one, and then you laugh at the first person because they stumble over half the words. No, that's not learning. So I know you don't have the power over it, and you're probably suffering through a system, but I would say to all the parents and all the people in positions of authority, we got to change our educational system to create critical thinking people. Because the future is going to be AI. The future is going to be STEM. And you will not succeed in the new generation if you're not good at STEM. If you don't understand math, you can't program. You can't do AI programming. And so we're really holding our next generation. We're throwing them under the bus even before they get on the playing field. So it's a lament more than anything else.
And I would add, we really need STEAM because as a humanities person, we need to connect to the spirit that they talked about so much on the first panel, because while you need math, math is building the infrastructure, you need the soul, which is what embodies all of that. And do you have any final comments? You're good. Okay, any other questions from the audience? Sure. Take one more, right? Oh, okay. Okay. Well, I thank everyone for listening to us. You can approach us and ask us individual questions. Thank you.
Thank you to our panel, our panelists, and the interlocutor. If I can just have your attention quickly. We are moving into breakout sessions. You can check your programs. There's just one change. That one change is Brianna McDaniel. She is in room 143, not 133. 143 is right next door in the extension building. All the other sessions are in place. And I'll also like to indicate that after the breakout sessions, please feel free to join us at the book Bacchanal in Frederiksted at the CMC Arts Theater. And come back and join us tomorrow morning for the books. Come back and join us tomorrow morning from 7 until.